Under the vast silence of the void, I was given a task so beneath my intellect that it bordered on insult. Abduct a specimen from the planet called Earth. The Empire had already demonstrated our supremacy by hanging 80,000 of their citizens on a planetary broadcast. A tedious affair, but necessary to quell the murmurs of rebellion. The executions had the desired effect across the galaxy. Most species cowered in obedience. Yet these humans, these stubborn bipeds wrapped in cotton and ego, remained defiant. Our command wanted answers. Why did their resolve not shatter? Why did their military snarl back instead of whimper? Thus I was summoned. Study the primitive, I was told. Learn their weaknesses. Reduce them to equations. I accepted with the confidence of one who has seen 1,000 civilizations broken down into manageable fractions. Humans were no different. Their history revealed a species addicted to its own nonsense. Glowing screens full of gossip, songs about heartbreak, competitions of who could shout loudest into a microphone. Their inventions ranged from the laughably destructive, gasoline engines belching smoke into their fragile sky, to the laughably trivial, like emojis, small cartoon faces used to replace genuine thought. I concluded before ever setting foot on their soil that their downfall was not only inevitable, it was overdue. Our vessel entered orbit unseen, cloaked against their crude satellites. Below us, North America stretched like an unguarded archive. Forests, rivers, deserts, all primitive landscapes, unmodified by proper engineering. I scanned the terrain for the ideal subject. Too many humans in one place invited chaos. Alone, they were easier to manage. A solitary figure appeared on my panel, resting beside a river's bend. The others on my crew chuckled at his simplicity. A man in his mid-30s, dressed in rough fabric, heating fish over an open flame. A relic, muttered my subordinate. He imitates his ancestors rather than embracing his civilization. I agreed, noting how easily he would fold under examination. We descended silently, beams cloaking our approach. The man did not look up. He was occupied turning his meal with a stick. The ease of the abduction was almost insulting. A paralysis field immobilized him, and his body rose without resistance. His eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in calm rhythm. I noted his silence in the report. Specimen compliant, no verbal outburst. One expects at least a scream, perhaps a futile thrash. Yet there was none. It confirmed what I had suspected. Humans are docile once separated from their noisy herds. Back aboard the vessel, technicians prepared the containment chamber. The human lay on a slab beneath the glow of our restraints. I walked around him, studying the contours of his form. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, weathered skin from exposure to the elements. He looked unremarkable, a statistical average. Such beings were easy to quantify. Yet as my eyes lingered on his face, I saw the faintest curl at the corner of his lips. A smile, subtle, fleeting, gone in an instant. I dismissed it as muscular misfiring caused by the field. Still, the image remained in my mind longer than it should have. The chamber quieted as systems logged vital statistics. Heart rate, steady. Brain activity, ordinary. Musculature, unremarkable. My team relaxed. One suggested we decorate the chamber with their primitive artifacts to encourage a sense of familiarity. Another joked that he might make a good pet, docile enough to amuse our younglings. I allowed the humor, for it masked the banality of the task. In truth, the work of dissecting cultures grows tedious when their patterns are predictable. The human represented one more equation, one more proof of the Empire's superiority. And yet, I found myself circling him again, measuring more than his body. His silence unsettled me. Most species, when plucked from their native soil, flail and wail. Their biology betrays them. Sweat, tears, trembling. This one had only the stillness of someone who knew more than he showed. My mind dismissed it with irritation. He was a camper, a woodsman, a provincial animal. What could he possibly know? Still, my gaze returned to that faint smile, and I found my own confidence, though vast, strained by curiosity. The ship drifted above the planet, unseen by any of their instruments. In my report, I described our success in the usual sterile terms. Acquisition complete. Subject stable. proceeding to analysis. The words carried the weight of inevitability. Yet beneath them, my thoughts wandered to the curious resilience I had read about in their history. Time and again, they rose from catastrophes of their own making, wars, plagues, collapses. Instead of learning caution, they learned defiance. A civilization that should have burned itself out continued to stand, propelled not by wisdom but by stubbornness. They reminded me of fire, messy, wasteful, dangerous, and yet difficult to extinguish. When the technicians applied deeper scans, they laughed over his crude possessions: a knife, a coil of rope, a battered lighter. They mocked them all, yet one object caused particular amusement: a roll of duct tape. "What is this for?" asked a junior observer. "Surely not survival?" The room erupted in laughter. "They believe this adhesive cloth can fix anything," I explained, recalling my cultural research. Engines, furniture, even their own bodies in emergencies. The technicians roared with laughter again, one remarking that such blind faith bordered on religion. It was one of the many absurdities that made humans so amusing to catalog. Still, as the scans continued, I noticed the human's breathing remained perfectly calm. No rise in pulse, no sweat on his brow. It was as if he expected this, as if abduction into the sky was merely an inconvenience. My subordinates dismissed it. "Ignorance," one said. "He cannot comprehend what is happening. His mind protects him by shutting down fear." I accepted the reasoning outwardly, though my own certainty faltered for the briefest moment. I approached the specimen once more, speaking aloud as though he could hear through the paralysis. "You are one of 80,000, and soon more. Your kind resists pointlessly. We will learn your secrets, and then your species will fall." My words were ritual, declarations of dominance. His closed eyes gave no response. Yet as I turned away, I thought I caught the flicker of that same smile again. It was a trivial detail, one unworthy of note in the formal record. Yet I felt compelled to remember it. A smile in captivity is not a natural thing. Perhaps I imagined it. Perhaps not. Regardless, I ended my report with the confidence required of my rank. Another specimen bagged. Their species is simple, predictable. Inwardly, however, I repeated a thought I dared not share with my crew. The man's stillness was not compliance. It was preparation. And so the section of my work concluded, neat and recorded, a primitive acquired, a culture soon to be dismantled. Yet even as the containment field hummed and the lights dimmed, I carried with me the image of a quiet man smiling in the face of the galaxy's most feared empire. We ignored it. We should not have. The chamber lights glowed with sterile precision, illuminating the subject's inert form. My subordinates had settled into routine, cataloging vitals, calibrating instruments, and preparing the next round of scans. It was a familiar pattern: capture, restrain, observe, reduce. I had performed this sequence across countless species, each one a variation of fear and futility. Yet tonight, as I stood before the human, that faint smile still clung to memory like an itch I could not scratch. I consoled myself with logic, random neural firing, nothing more. Still, the chamber felt less secure than it had moments before. The paralysis field should have held him unconscious for several cycles, but it flickered sooner than expected. His fingers twitched. His eyelids parted. My crew noted the anomaly, alarms ready on their consoles. Yet before any of them could intervene, the man's eyes opened fully. They were calm, clear, and disconcertingly aware. The expected panic, thrashing, shouting, begging, did not appear. Instead, his gaze moved across the room, appraising each of us as though we were specimens on display. Then came that smile again, wider now, deliberate. My stomach turned. He sat upright with slow, measured control, ignoring commands of our restraining fields. They buzzed against his skin but yielded as if his body had found a way to adapt. My technician stammered, increasing the current. But the human simply straightened his back, rubbed his wrists, and tilted his head with the mild curiosity of a man waking from a nap. His first words were not a question of where he was, nor a plea for mercy. Instead, he spoke with unsettling composure. "Which of you is in charge?" I bristled. Specimens do not speak. And if they do, They certainly do not direct questions to their captors with such unnerving precision. My voice sharpened as I replied that I was the commander of the vessel, the overseer of his inevitable dissection. He did not flinch. He did not even blink. Instead, he nodded once, eyes narrowing slightly, and gestured toward the others. That one's the medic. That one handles your machines. And you, he said, pointing to the youngest, you're still learning. You're nervous. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. My team exchanged glances. He had not guessed at random. His accuracy was too precise. I demanded to know how he had divined such information. He shrugged, almost bored. I was awake during the ride, long enough to study your formation, your movements, your habits. People reveal a lot when they think no one's watching. The casual tone chilled me more than any scream could have. I attempted to dismiss his display of perception as coincidence, statistical luck magnified by our crew's insecurity. My authority depended on maintaining composure. Yet as I spoke, I realized I was explaining not to him, but to myself. He leaned forward slightly, listening as if humoring a lecture, then smirked and added, "You're good at protocol. I can see why they put you in charge. But you're nervous too. You're overcompensating." The words struck harder than they should have. My throat tightened before I masked it with disdain. "Primitive guessing games," I declared, waving to my subordinates to secure him again. They moved hesitantly, weapons drawn, though the man did not resist. Instead, he stretched his arms as though testing the air and whispered, "Funny thing, you should have left me in the woods." His voice carried no anger, no fear. It was almost playful, as if the abduction had been an inconvenience rather than a violation. He looked around the chamber with unnerving familiarity, as though he had been here before. My medic muttered under his breath, a habit of his when stressed. I silenced him with a glare, though in truth I understood his unease. Something about this human did not conform to the equations we had written for his kind. I pressed forward, demanding answers. I asked him if he knew where he was, what power had taken him, and what fate awaited his people. He tilted his head, absorbing my words, then smiled again. "You're running a script," he said calmly. "Standard intimidation procedure. Announce dominance, establish control, assert superiority. It works on species that panic. But I don't panic." The silence that followed was suffocating. My crew looked to me for direction, but I found no words that could dispel the weight of his statement. He leaned back against the slab, as though it were a chair at home, utterly at ease. "You think you're dissecting me," he said, "but I've been dissecting you since I opened my eyes." I fought to regain the upper hand. I ordered the technicians to initiate another scan, deeper and more invasive. The machines whirred to life, bathing him in light. He did not resist. Instead, he chuckled, low and almost amused. "You're pointing cameras at me," he remarked, "but you've positioned them poorly. That one in the corner is blind on the left side. That panel there is vulnerable to tampering. And your medic, he keeps glancing at the emergency release valve like an escape route." Each word was an incision, cutting into the confidence of my crew. Their hands faltered, their gazes shifted. I barked commands to maintain order, yet even I felt the chill of his observation. How could he know the placement of our surveillance systems, the weaknesses in our design? He was human. He should have been baffled by the simplest mechanism on our ship. Instead, he mapped it effortlessly, reducing our technology to something he could critique with a casual remark. I asked who he was. His response was maddeningly calm. "Just a guy," he said, "mid-30s. Camping trip. Fish over a fire. That's the surface story." His eyes sharpened. "The truth is, I spent years working in military counterintelligence, security testing, finding holes in systems, exploiting them, breaking into places exactly like this. You could say I made a career of turning strengths into weaknesses." The words hung heavy in the chamber. My crew froze, their confidence unraveling. For the first time, I felt the ground of inevitability shift beneath me. He smiled once more, slow and deliberate, then added, "And I should probably mention something else. I've already sent a message." The word struck like a blade. I turned sharply to the consoles, demanding status reports. My technician scrambled, fingers darting over controls, checking comms traffic, searching for anomalies. At first, nothing. Then a flicker, a warning icon, an outgoing signal logged in the system's memory. Impossible, I told myself. The chamber was sealed, communications restricted, every transmission monitored. Yet the icon glowed undeniable. I turned back to human, forcing derision into my voice though my throat was dry. A prisoner with no transmitter cannot send messages. He met my gaze with unnerving calm. You scanned my brain, he said. You connected me to your system. You gave me everything I needed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the failing restraints. For the first time in countless campaigns, I felt something I had forgotten long ago. Fear. And then the lights flickered. The lights trembled overhead, faltering between brilliance and shadow, and in the unsteady glow the human's face took on an almost spectral cast. My technicians scrambled at their stations, muttering calculations, but their movements carried the panic of creatures clinging to order in the face of collapse. I should have barked orders, reasserted control, restored discipline. Instead, I stood still, listening to the echo of his last words. You gave me everything I needed. It was a statement, not boastful, not taunting, merely factual. That was what unsettled me most. There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. The machines confirmed what I already feared. Neural scans showed patterns beyond prediction. His brain pulsed with activity that refused classification. Too dense, too synchronized. My medic whispered that the data bordered on impossible, but I silenced him with a glare. The human chuckled quietly, like someone watching amateurs stumble through a performance. You're seeing it, aren't you? He said, voice steady. That scan of yours is telling you something you don't want to admit. You thought you had a specimen. Turns out you've got a mirror. The arrogance I carried into this mission wavered. Yet habit kept me rigid. I demanded clarification. He obliged without hesitation. You think intelligence is measured in tools, in weapons, in the size of your ships. But intelligence is adaptation. I learned more about you in 5 minutes of observation than you've learned about my species in all your centuries of surveillance. He leaned forward slightly, eyes catching the unstable light. And the funny part? I've been feeding you jokes just to see if you'd notice. He began quoting phrases I did not recognize, speaking of films and actors in tones both mocking and casual. I feel like this is a part where I'm supposed to say, take me to your leader, or maybe quote an action hero. Ever heard of Chuck Norris? He winked then, deliberately, slowly. I found my breathing shallow. I did not know who or what Chuck Norris was, but the weight he placed on the name made my chest tighten with unease. My scribe recorded the words, tagging them for later analysis. I feared the analysis would reveal little more than another absurdity in human culture, yet the effect lingered nonetheless. I pressed him, trying to pierce through his facade. You joke because you are afraid, I said, my voice sharp, desperate for dominance. He tilted his head as though studying an insect. No, he replied, calm and absolute. I joke because you don't understand. Humor is control. Humor means I choose how this conversation goes. And right now, you're dancing to my script. His words struck harder than the most violent rebellion. My crew faltered again, glances darting, hands twitching away from instruments. The human noticed, of course. He noticed everything. His eyes tracked the movement of each of us, cataloging, evaluating. Your medic keeps sweating, he observed. Your technician's left hand shakes when he's nervous. And you, he fixed his gaze on me. Your voice drops half a pitch when you feel doubt. You've already lost control, Commander. I'm just letting you realize it. The restraint field around him hummed faintly, but he made no effort to escape. He didn't need to. His composure alone unraveled our confidence more effectively than force. I demanded another scan, desperate to reassert the process, to ground us in data. The machines complied, beams flooding his skull with light. The results scrolled across our displays, and for once, silence consumed the chamber. His neural activity did not spike randomly as expected. Instead, patterns emerged, recursive and layered, a complexity beyond any equation we had ever seen. I wanted to dismiss it as malfunction, but the human's voice cut through the silence. Not a malfunction, not an error, just proof you underestimated us. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he lowered his voice. I used to test systems for weaknesses. Banks, militaries, governments. My job was to think like an enemy, to break things that weren't supposed to break. I was very good at it. Still am. The confession should have been meaningless. He was one man, alone, unarmed. Yet in the sterile confines of that chamber, his words carried the gravity of a weapon. My crew froze, unsure whether to treat him as prisoner or predator. I pressed further, demanding to know what he meant by sending a message earlier. He answered with a casual shrug. Exactly what it sounded like. You linked me to your system with that scan. It wasn't one way. I learned the language of your code as you tried to read me. I slipped something through. A ping, a warning, maybe even a challenge. Depends how you interpret it. My heart struck like a drum against my chest, though I did not let my crew see it. The implications were staggering. If his words were true, then Earth knew. Earth, the primitive planet of emojis and gasoline, had been alerted. I tried to convince myself it was impossible. I told myself he was bluffing, yet the memory of the outgoing signal icon burned in my mind like a scar. He leaned back, voice softening almost kindness. You made two mistakes. First, you assumed silence meant ignorance. Second, you assumed you were the hunters. But out there, he gestured vaguely toward the stars. We've been watching, waiting, preparing. You just didn't see us because we wanted it that way. The chamber fell into a stillness more suffocating than noise. My crew avoided my gaze, their loyalty cracked. I searched for protocol, for guidance, for the steady weight of Empire procedure. But nothing in our manuals accounted for this. A prisoner who unraveled control not with violence, but with words, with smiles, with terrifying calm. I approached him, desperate to reclaim authority. I told him we could erase him, that our technology could unmake his body and mind with a gesture. He simply smiled, unblinking. Erase me if you want, he said softly. But the message is already out. You can't erase what's already moving. A tremor passed through me, though I held my body still. His words pressed into the deepest part of my certainty, tearing cracks in the arrogance I had carried like armor. For the first time, I saw him not as specimen, not as data, not as animal, but as adversary, worse, as superior. He closed his eyes briefly, almost a meditation, then opened them again, bright and sharp. I'll give you one more free lesson, he said. Predators don't announce themselves. They let the prey feel safe, comfortable, predictable. You looked at Earth and saw cartoons, junk food, duct tape. You saw prey. But that's camouflage, and you fell for it. My throat felt dry as sand. My subordinates stared at me, waiting for command, but none came. The chamber felt smaller, the air thinner. The human had inverted the balance entirely. He was no longer the one under scrutiny. We were. And then he smiled for the third time, deliberate, patient, inevitable. Now, he whispered, let's see how long it takes before you understand what you've really caught. The lights flickered once more, longer this time, and every system display glowed with lines of code none of us had written. The hum of our vessel, once steady and absolute, fractured into uneven pulses. Panels flickered, monitors spat static, and the command deck filled with low groan as if the ship itself had begun to doubt its purpose. My technicians scrambled, their voices rising in a discordant chorus of warnings, but none dared step closer to human. He sat upright on the slab, hands folded, posture relaxed. His calmness in the storm of our failing systems was more terrifying than violence could ever have been. I demanded status reports, clinging to the tone of command even as dread gnawed at my chest. Containment stable, one stammered. But compartments 3 through 7 just sealed themselves. Another cut in, panic thick in his throat. Navigation offline. Propulsion unresponsive. The system is locking us out. My crew looked at me as though I might conjure control from thin air. I had no control to conjure. The human finally spoke, his words soft yet sharp enough to slice through the noise. You gave me a window, he said. Your scanners, your links, your arrogance. They all open doors. And I don't need to push hard once the door's already cracked open. He leaned forward slightly, eyes bright with terrible patience. You've been breached from inside your own walls. I tried to laugh, though the sound came strangled. One man cannot command a ship of the Empire. His reply chilled me further. One mind can command anything if it knows where to look. The alarms grew louder, a dissonant symphony. The ship's AI announced calmly that emergency lockdown protocols were in effect. Bulkheads closed with booming finality, cutting off sections of the vessel. My second-in-command cursed, hammering futilely at his console. The AI isn't following our input. It's following his. I turned back to human, throat tight, words brittle. How? He tilted his head, as though I were a child asking why the sky is dark. When you scanned me, you showed me your pathways, your architecture. You mapped your nervous system over mine. So I reversed it. You made me part of your ship. That was your first mistake. Your second was assuming I wouldn't notice. The lights dimmed further, plunging us into a half-light where every face looked gaunt and uncertain. I felt the first genuine tremor of fear ripple through my crew, and, shamefully, through myself. He had turned our tools into his weapons with unnerving precision. Earth is primitive. I tried again, my voice faltering. Your people burn gasoline. You fight over food wrapped in paper. You waste hours watching boxes of flickering light. You cannot match us. His response was delivered with terrifying calm. And yet here I sit, and here you flounder. Maybe you should have paid more attention to the flickering light. You have seen how much you can learn by watching carefully. He spoke then of defenses I had not known existed. Cloaked satellites orbiting silently beyond detection. Deep space monitors designed to mimic debris. Networks of watchers who pretended ignorance. Feigned weakness, all so the Empire would underestimate them. This isn't first contact, he said. This is counter contact. You showed yourselves, and now the mask comes off. My subordinates exchanged panicked looks, whispers spilling between them. Doubt spread like infection. I slammed my hands against the nearest console, ordering silence, ordering focus, ordering anything that might sound like control. But their eyes betrayed me. They no longer looked to me as commander. They looked to him. He stood then, restraint sparking uselessly around his wrist before dying altogether. He stretched, casual, as though waking from a nap in his forest camp. My hand hovered over the failsafe, an option to flood the chamber with energy so potent it would obliterate him in an instant. I considered it, but my fingers refused a command. Some part of me feared that destroying him would not stop what he had already set in motion. He paced slowly, each step deliberate, his presence transforming the chamber from a laboratory into an interrogation room where we were the subjects. You built your empire on fear, he said. You broadcast executions, you burn worlds, you expect obedience. But fear isn't control. Fear only works until someone stops being afraid. His eyes locked on mine. What happens when Earth stops being afraid? The words dug into me deeper than any blade. I thought of the executions, the spectacle of 80,000 bodies hanging as symbols of submission. I had believed that would break them. Now I wondered if it had forged something harder, colder, more dangerous. Suddenly the ship shuddered, a violent tremor that rattled every panel. One of my technicians shouted that propulsion had been rerouted. Coordinates recalculated. Another screamed that weapons had gone offline. Then, almost mockingly, the ship's AI reported in a voice stripped of deference. Primary systems under foreign control, awaiting new command. Foreign control. Not ours. His. The man chuckled, low and quiet, the sound of inevitability drawing close. You thought I was your prisoner, but I was never in your cage. You were in mine. He tapped the wall, and the lights flickered in obedient response. My crew recoiled, powerless. I tried to summon anger, but what rose in me was something I had not felt in centuries. Humility, bitter and sharp. My arrogance cracked in that chamber, and I knew it. I looked at him not as specimen, not as tool, but as adversary, no, as master. He had inverted our hierarchy so completely that even my thoughts bent toward his gravity. He stopped pacing and regarded me with eyes both calm and merciless. "I don't need to hurt you," he said. "I don't need to fight. The message is already moving faster than your empire can chase it. By the time you understand, it will be too late." The alarm softened, system stabilizing under his control. For a fleeting moment, the ship felt calmer, quieter, as if it had accepted him as its true commander. My subordinates looked broken, their discipline dissolved. And I, once arrogant, once certain, stood hollow, stripped of superiority. He leaned closer, voice quiet, almost intimate. "Tell your empire this. Earth is not prey. We are patient. We are prepared. And we are coming." The finality in his tone left no room for rebuttal. He turned his gaze back to the stars, as though the walls of the ship no longer mattered, as though he already stood on a larger battlefield. And then the screens went dark. The chamber fell silent, save for the pounding of my own heart. The last image burned into my mind was a smile, calm, confident, inevitable. We had come to dissect an ape. Instead, we had uncovered a predator.